In Demon Slayer, the characters use different breathing styles to battle demons.
But all the weapons these characters use come from Eastern martial arts.
What would Demon Slayer look like if it took place in medieval Europe? Let's start off with the main character, Tanjiro.
Tanjiro uses water breathing, which is described as being adaptable and flexible. Essentially, it flows like water does.
A lot of the attacks he uses in the show fluidly move between one position to the next as he cuts through his enemies.
And because of this, we think that Tanjiro would use late period Meyer KDF.
Meyer was a fencing master who wrote about fencing in the mid to late 1500s.
This was after the heyday of the longsword on the battlefield. By this point, the longsword had moved to more of a sporting or dueling context.
And because of this, it required a lot of complexity.
One of the things Meyer talks about is moving or flowing through all the different guards to create defenses and openings.
Many of the attacks in KDF move from one guard to the next, which makes it very easy to transition between these guards as you're fighting.
This serves two purposes. The first of which is it's efficient.
And the second is it can present the appearance of openings. If I'm outside of distance and I'm flourishing between the guards, I give my opponent the appearance that I'm not ready for him, but I'm still in a good position to strike back in and take advantage.
This flow and adaptable movement is why we think Meyer KDF would be perfect for Tanjiro.
This video is sponsored by us! We don't have sponsors. So why don't you go ahead and check out our Patreon where you can donate to the channel for as low as $1 a month and get access to behind the scenes stuff.
You also get your name in the credits at the $5 tier.
Help us, we're poor! Next, let's take a look at one of the others in the original trio, Zenitsu.
Zenitsu uses thunder breathing, which is all about straight, direct attacks that use footwork and incredible speed.
And this is why we think Zenitsu would be great at Italian Rapier.
Italian Rapier is all about speed, athleticism, footwork, and direct attacks.
Most of the attacks in Italian Rapier are straight line thrusts, but there are cuts usually coming after you have been parried. There are a lot of different styles of Italian Rapier and it evolved over the years, but at their heart, most of them have these big athletic movements, deep lunges, fleshes, incortadas.
The emphasis of Italian Rapier is on direct, quick attacks.
And because of all of this, we think Zenitsu would be perfect for Italian Rapier.
Now there is one last caveat here.
In Demon Slayer, you have to cut off the head of the demon for them to die, and this is a thrust, but we're just gonna say that his thrust would be so powerful, they would probably decapitate the demon anyway. Maybe explode their head.
So if we're going in order, that means next up is
Inosuke!
Inosuke uses beast breathing, which is described as being fierce, unpredictable, and wild, but also being simple and straightforward.
This is a tough one, and this is when we get more into more anime style stuff than we do actual martial arts. There isn't realistically a style that does this, at least not in European martial arts.
Also, there isn't a lot of dual wielding with two primarily offensive weapons like swords.
There is dual wielding with rapier and dagger, rapier and buckler, and sometimes some other combinations, but not this.
Inosuke wouldn't use a rapier.
Originally, we thought maybe we'd go with something like a boar spear, because he's the boar.
But this doesn't really fit thematically, because they all use swords. We shouldn't give him a spear.
Also, it's gonna keep him too far away from the action. He wants to be up in there. We also thought about giving him something like a sword and an axe, but
while it fits thematically, we don't actually have any direct sources talking about how sword and axe would have been used, so we don't know if it really fit his style.
We really don't have that many sources talking about how to use an axe in combat, and the axes that were used in combat were more like pole axes, not like these short axes. They were used in combat, it just really wasn't written about.
So what we actually decided on going with was early I-33 sword and buckler.
The reason we chose this is because sword and buckler is nasty and brutal.
Now we hear all of you shouting that Inosuke needs two swords, not a shield.
But this isn't just for defense. When you start doing sword and buckler, it's all about closing in, and if I've got this here, I'm absolutely gonna smash someone with it.
In Inosuke's hand, a buckler is absolutely a weapon.
And for someone who purposely made his swords worse so they would hurt demons more, I think he'd be okay with punching someone with a buckler.
Especially with a spiky one like this. I-33 sword and buckler is all about keeping these retracted positions, covering the hand with your buckler, and coming in, controlling your opponent's sword, transferring to the buckler in order to hack them to bits.
Sword and buckler gets close and nasty.
It's all about closing to your opponent, controlling their sword, getting up close and personal, and hacking them to bits. It's fierce, it's violent.
Clark, no one heard any of that. These are so loud.
You're right.
I-33 is the oldest manuscript on swordsmanship that we have at this time.
I-33 can get pretty complex when you get to the binds and controlling your opponent's weapon, but at the end of the day, it's all about closing in safely, controlling your opponent's weapon to create an opening, and killing them.
This makes it simple and straightforward.
There's also so many things going on because you both have two implements, so it's pretty unpredictable.
And as we've mentioned earlier, it's very violent. And all of these mean it's perfect for Inosuke. Next up is Rengoku, who uses flame breathing.
Flame breathing is described as single, powerful attacks, generally from a high guard, that hit so hard that it burns their opponent through the parry.
And this is why we chose to give him a cavalry saber.
Cavalry sabers are some of the most powerful one-handed cutting weapons that we had in Europe.
The saber and the katana share a lot of things in common. The curvature makes it easier to cut with, and these bigger sabers pack a lot of punch, especially if you know how to use them correctly. Cavalry sabers were generally used on horseback. You'd use the power of the horse as he ran by to cleave your opponent in half.
But that doesn't mean that they weren't used on foot.
Cavalry sabers were used on foot, and a lot of the actions come from these high guards and the rolling action of the blade. This generates a ton of momentum, and if your opponent has a bad guard, you will absolutely blast through it.
Because of these high guard positions,
And the power you get from engaging the entire chain of the body in your cut.
we think that the cavalry saber would be perfect for Rengoku.
Next, let's talk about Obanai.
Slithering serpent.
Obanai uses serpent breathing, which is emulating a snake's fast striking ability and slithering around their opponent's defenses.
And for this reason, we think that Obanai would use Spanish Destreza Rapier. Spanish Destreza Rapier is very different than Italian Rapier. Instead of striking in with big lunges, the Spanish style is more interested with these long, extended positions, and instead of using big, explosive footwork, a lot of the times they'll use their blade work to move their opponent's sword out of the way.
It's still extremely fast, but the speed comes from manipulating your opponent's blade, not from exploding forward with footwork.
A Master of Destreza looks a lot like a snake slithering around their opponent's guard.
And I can already hear you all complaining that it's a straight sword, he's a serpent user.
But don't worry,
There's such a thing as a Flamberge rapier that he would absolutely use.
mostly for style points. And last on our list for part one is Tengen Uzui.
Tengen uses sound breathing, which is complicated.
What does the thing say?
It says that breathing style mimics sound. Specifically, it's disorientating loudness and replicating it in the user's movements. They all use explosives and they're extremely fast. And he also has like super hearing to know what's going around. He's also a ninja. There's a lot going on.
Look, listen, look, this is where we verged very far into anime ridiculousness. And I'm sorry, European martial arts don't have any of that.
We thought about phoning it in and just giving him a cutlass and gun.
Pirates and ninjas are the same thing, right?
But there's already a character who uses a gun, so that's out.
So we got a little bit creative.
Bolognese sword and buckler.
No one could hear any of that.
Bolognese sword and buckler.
Why, you might ask?
It's loud.
Ow. And it's a two-handed thing, and Uzui uses his two-handed. Look, there's not a lot. There's not a lot of things.
This style of sword and buckler is later than I-33, so they had a more complex guard, so we were less concerned about keeping your hand covered by the buckler. This means that they tended to hold it out at max extension all the time and cut around the buckler, creating openings and closing lines. They also would hit the buckler to mess up their opponent, and it created sound.
It sure does create sound.
In theory, Uzui could use this to create sound waves and throw them at his opponent or disorientate them because he's a sound hashira. As for the explosives,
Europe did have some explosives in the early Middle Ages, but they weren't super useful. They had these big tube hand cannon things that were pretty impractical. There were cannons, but most of that stuff came later, and they really didn't have like grenades that were any kind of useful.
but since when has anime been concerned about being historically accurate, he could have a bandolier of grenades and throw them with his buckler and whatever.
So there you go. We've solved Tengen Uzui. Totally the exact thing he would. Shut up! Okay, a couple of caveats before we end the video. We can hear you typing away in the comment section right now.
Some of these swords are not from medieval Europe.
We stretched the limit so that we were getting into the Renaissance with some of the rapier stuff.
It's more interesting if we have a greater variety of swords and styles, okay?
But they all come from Europe, which is half of the requirement for this video.
And they all stem from a earlier period version of that weapon, so
stop sending me hate mail.
Also, you may have noticed that we missed a few characters because there were so many different breathing styles.
So let us know in the comments section if you want to see part 2 of Medieval Demon Slayer.